Here's the introduction based on your provided script. Run, Charlie. Just run. Mia's voice cracked as she sprinted down the smoky street, gripping her dog's leash tightly. The world around them was burning. Orange flames licked the dark sky, sending showers of ash raining down like some twisted version of snow. Her best friend, Charlie, stumbled behind her, coughing into the sleeve of his jacket. The wildfire had moved faster than anyone expected, faster than any warning siren could keep up with. One moment, they were packing a few belongings. The next, they were running for their lives. The wind roared like a monster, whipping smoke and embers into the air, blinding them with every step. It wasn't supposed to get this bad, was it? They had heard the evacuation alerts earlier in the day, but thought they'd have more time. Time to grab their photo albums, the old guitar in the corner, maybe even that potted plant Mia had cared for since college. But no, when the fire started racing down the canyon, swallowing trees and homes in seconds, it became clear. Time had run out. Charlie glanced back, his heart sinking as he saw flames creeping closer, devouring everything in their path. Mia, wait. Are we even going the right way? He shouted, his voice barely carrying over the deafening roar of the fire. I don't know, but we can't stop now, she yelled back, her words fueled by panic and adrenaline. Her dog, Max, barked furiously, as if he, too, understood the danger. They passed abandoned cars on the road, their tires melted into the asphalt, and houses where flames danced wildly behind shattered windows. It felt like the end of the world, like a scene out of a disaster movie, except this was terrifyingly real. Somewhere in the chaos, Mia's phone buzzed. She pulled it out, her hands trembling, and saw the latest alert: mandatory evacuation. Area under extreme threat. Leave immediately. Below it, a grim note. Fire 0% contained. What now? Charlie asked, his breath ragged. We have to keep going. The main road should be ahead. Mia replied, though her voice betrayed the uncertainty she felt. They didn't know if the road would be clear or if the fire had already claimed it. Every step felt like a gamble, a desperate attempt to outrun something that couldn't be outrun. As they neared the edge of their neighborhood, the crackling of flames grew louder. Then they saw it, the main road, littered with abandoned belongings, cars left in chaos, and a bulldozer clearing debris in a frantic effort to make an escape route. Relief began to swell in Mia's chest, but it was short-lived. A gust of wind swept through the canyon, carrying a fresh wave of embers directly toward them. Oh my God, Mia whispered, her voice barely audible over the rising inferno. And then, as they stared at the wall of fire bearing down on them, the unthinkable happened. The heat was unbearable, like standing in front of an open oven, but there was nowhere to run. Mia's mind raced, searching for a way out. She tightened her grip on Max's leash, her heart pounding so hard it felt like it might burst. Charlie, we have to move. Now, she screamed, the desperation raw in her voice. But Charlie stood frozen, his wide eyes fixed on the wall of flames creeping closer. We're not going to make it. This is it, isn't it? He mumbled, almost in a trance. Snap out of it. Mia shouted, grabbing his arm and pulling him forward. We're not giving up, do you hear me? Keep moving. The flames roared louder as the wind howled through the canyon, pushing thick smoke into the air. It clawed at their lungs, burning with every breath. Their shoes crunched over broken glass and charred debris, each step feeling heavier than the last. They didn't know where they were going anymore. The main road that had once been a beacon of hope now seemed like a death trap. Mia's mind flashed back to the morning, how ordinary it had all seemed. The coffee brewing in the kitchen, the faint hum of a radio, and the sound of Max's paws clicking on the hardwood floor. The wildfire warnings had been on the news, sure, but it had all felt so distant, so surreal. Fires happened to other people, in other places. Not here. Not to them. But everything had changed in an instant. The sky turned dark, the air thick with smoke, and the once quiet neighborhood was swallowed by chaos. People screamed in the distance, cars honked wildly as they sped past, and helicopters buzzed overhead, dropping water on flames that seemed invincible. "Do you think anyone else is still out here?" Charlie asked, his voice trembling as they ducked under a low-hanging tree branch, its leaves singed black. Mia hesitated, not wanting to admit the truth. Most people had evacuated hours ago. They were the ones who stayed behind, thinking they'd be fine, thinking they could outlast the fire.
But now?
Now, they were paying for it. "I don't know," she finally replied, her voice quieter now. "But we can't worry about anyone else right now. We just have to." A sudden crash interrupted her words. A tree, its trunk weakened by the fire, had toppled onto the road ahead, blocking their path. Sparks flew as the branches hit the ground, sending a fresh wave of panic through Mia and Charlie. "Great, now what?" Charlie exclaimed, throwing his hands up in frustration. Mia scanned their surroundings, her mind working overtime. To the left, the fire raged, consuming everything in its path. To the right was a steep drop-off into a dry ravine. The road behind them was already engulfed in flames. They were trapped. Then, through the smoke, she spotted something, a narrow dirt path winding up the side of the canyon. It wasn't much, but it was their only chance. "Over there," Mia shouted, pointing toward the trail. "Come on, we have to try." Charlie hesitated, staring at the narrow path that disappeared into the smoke. "Are you sure about this?" "No," Mia admitted, already moving toward it. "But it's better than standing here." As they scrambled up the uneven trail, the flames roared louder behind them, inching closer with every second. The air grew hotter, the smoke thicker, and the ground beneath their feet felt like it could crumble at any moment. Mia's legs burned from the effort, but she didn't dare stop. Every step forward felt like a victory, a defiance against the fire threatening to consume them. Max whimpered, his ears flat against his head, but he kept moving, his instincts driving him forward. Just when it seemed like they might have a chance, Mia froze. Her foot had caught on something, a rusted metal box half buried in the dirt. She crouched down, her curiosity momentarily overpowering her fear. "Mia, what are you doing?" Charlie yelled, glancing nervously over his shoulder at the approaching flames. But Mia couldn't look away. The box was scorched and battered, its lid slightly ajar. Something about it felt important, though she couldn't explain why.
"We don't have time for this,"
Charlie shouted again, pulling at her arm. Reluctantly, Mia stood, leaving the mysterious box behind. But the image of it lingered in her mind as they climbed higher, the fire closing in and the trail ahead disappearing into the smoke. The group pressed forward, their every step feeling like a gamble against time. The flames roared louder, closer, as if the fire itself were chasing them, hunting them. Mia's shoulders screamed in pain from carrying the injured man, but she didn't dare stop. The heat was oppressive, wrapping around them like a suffocating blanket, and the smoke burned her eyes until tears streamed down her face. Every breath was a battle. Every inhale carried the sharp sting of ash. "Faster. We have to move faster," Mia urged, her voice hoarse. "We're trying." Charlie snapped back, his face drenched in sweat. He stumbled, nearly dropping his side of the injured man, but caught himself at the last second. "This guy's dead weight, Mia. I don't know how much longer." "You can. You don't have a choice," she shouted, her desperation spilling out. Behind them, the fire was relentless. Embers flew through the air, landing on their clothes and hair. Mia slapped at her sleeve, smothering a tiny spark before it could catch. Her heart raced, the sound of her own blood pounding in her ears. She glanced over her shoulder, her stomach twisting at the sight of flames licking at the edge of the path they had just crossed. "Where does this trail even lead?" Charlie asked, coughing violently as they climbed higher. The wiry man, leading the group, turned back briefly. His face was shadowed with exhaustion and fear. "There's a clearing up ahead, at least there used to be. If we can make it there, maybe the helicopters will see us." "Maybe," Charlie exclaimed, his voice tinged with disbelief. "It's all we've got." Mia snapped, cutting him off. The dirt trail grew steeper, and the ground beneath their feet crumbled with each step. Mia's muscles burned, but she refused to let go of the injured man, even as his weight dragged her down. She could feel Max tugging at his leash, his barks echoing in the chaos, as if he, too, was urging them forward. Suddenly, a deafening crack split the air. Mia froze, her eyes darting to the treetops above them. One of the massive trees, its trunk scorched black, groaned under the weight of its own branches. Before anyone could react, it began to fall. "Move! Move!" Mia screamed, throwing herself to the side just as the tree crashed down, splitting the path in two. The impact shook the ground, sending a fresh wave of embers and ash into the air. "Is everyone okay?" she called out, her voice shaking. "We're fine," the woman shouted from the other side of the fallen tree. Mia's heart sank as she realized the group had been separated. She and Charlie were on one side, along with the injured man. The others were on the opposite side, their faces barely visible through the smoke. "What do we do now?" Charlie asked, panic creeping into his voice. Mia swallowed hard, forcing herself to think. The fire was closing in, and the path was blocked. They couldn't go back, and the others were too far to help. She glanced up the slope, her eyes searching desperately for another way out. "There's no time to figure it out," Charlie yelled, his voice breaking. Mia's eyes landed on a jagged outcropping of rocks higher up the slope. It wasn't a path, but it might lead to safety, or at least buy them more time. "There," she said, pointing toward the rocks. "We climb." "You've got to be kidding me," Charlie said, staring at the steep, uneven terrain. "I'm not," Mia said firmly. "It's this or we burn." Without waiting for a response, she adjusted her grip on the injured man and began to climb. The sharp edges of the rocks cut into her hands, but she didn't care. Max barked furiously, staying close to her heels, while Charlie reluctantly followed, grumbling under his breath. The climb was brutal. Every movement sent loose rocks tumbling down the slope, and the heat from the fire seemed to rise with them, scorching their skin. The injured man groaned softly, his head lolling to the side. Mia's arms trembled, but she refused to stop, refused to give in to the fear clawing at her chest. When they reached the top of the outcropping, Mia pulled herself up onto a narrow ledge and looked around, her heart sinking. The fire was everywhere. The sky glowed a sickly orange, and the smoke was so thick it felt like the world was closing in. "Mia," Charlie said, his voice barely above a whisper. "What now?" She didn't answer. Her eyes were fixed on something in the distance, a faint glimmer of light cutting through the smoke. A helicopter. But could they reach it in time? Mia's breath caught in her throat as she stared at the faint glimmer of the helicopter's searchlight cutting through the haze. "Charlie, look. Over there," she shouted, her voice breaking with a mix of relief and desperation. Charlie squinted through the smoke, his face streaked with soot and exhaustion. That's a rescue chopper," he exclaimed, the faintest flicker of hope igniting in his eyes. But the joy was short-lived. The roar of the flames below reminded them how little time they had. The fire was still climbing, the heat pressing against them like an invisible wall. The injured man groaned, barely conscious, and Max barked incessantly, his tail low, sensing the danger that surrounded them. "We need to signal them," Mia yelled, glancing around for anything that could catch the helicopter's attention. Her eyes landed on a broken piece of glass wedged between two rocks, reflecting the faint glow of the fire. She grabbed it, angling it toward the light. "Will that even work?" Charlie asked, his voice full of doubt as he clung to the injured man's arm. "It has to," Mia snapped, her hands trembling as she tilted the glass, catching the light and aiming it upward. The beam flickered and danced in the smoky air, a tiny spark of hope in the chaos. Seconds felt like hours as they waited, their hearts pounding. Then, the helicopter began to change direction. Slowly, it turned toward them, the sound of its rotors growing louder. "They see us!" Mia cried, her voice cracking with emotion. The relief was almost overwhelming, but the danger wasn't over. The ledge they stood on was unstable, crumbling with every shift of their weight. The fire below roared louder, closing in like a living beast. The helicopter hovered above them, the powerful downdraft of its rotors whipping the smoke into swirling clouds. A rope ladder was lowered, swaying precariously in the wind. "Go, Mia. You first," Charlie shouted over the noise. Mia shook her head, gripping Max's leash tightly. "No way. He goes first." She motioned toward the injured man, her voice firm. With Charlie's help, they carefully maneuvered the man toward the ladder. He groaned in pain, but they managed to secure him onto the rungs. The helicopter crew signaled from above, pulling him up slowly as Mia and Charlie watched, their bodies tense with urgency. "Hurry up. The fire's right there," Charlie yelled, pointing to the flames licking at the base of the rocks. Max barked furiously, his leash pulling taut as the heat intensified. Mia turned to Charlie. "You go next." "No, I'm not leaving you here," he shouted back, his voice filled with fear and frustration. "Just go. I'll be right behind you," she insisted, shoving him toward the ladder. Charlie hesitated for a moment, then reluctantly climbed onto the rungs, his face pale. The helicopter began lifting him, but just as Mia thought they might all make it out alive, a loud crack split the air. The ledge beneath her feet gave way. "Mia!" Charlie screamed from the ladder, his voice filled with terror. She scrambled, her hands clawing at the crumbling rocks, her heart racing as the ground gave way beneath her. Max barked wildly, his leash tangled around her wrist. The helicopter crew yelled something she couldn't hear over the chaos, and then, suddenly, the ladder was swinging back toward her. She reached for it, her fingers brushing against the rope. "Come on, Mia. You can do it," Charlie yelled, his voice hoarse. With one last burst of strength, she grabbed the ladder and held on tight, Max clinging to her side as the helicopter lifted them both into the air. The fire roared below, furious and unrelenting, but they were rising above it, out of its reach. As they ascended, Mia let out a shaky breath, tears streaming down her soot-covered face. They had made it. Somehow, against all odds, they had survived. But just as the helicopter began to level out, Mia noticed something, the faint flicker of another fire starting in the distance, far beyond where they had just escaped. Her stomach twisted. This wasn't the end. Not for California. Not for anyone. The battle was far from over.